tonight's City Council meeting. Council members are attending this meeting remotely by video conference. Tonight's meeting is available to the public on Channel 8 and through live streaming on Broomfield's website. Public's participation is encouraged by calling 855-695-3744 and pressing *3. That's *3 to be placed in the queue for comment. Please note, if you would like to speak on more than one item on tonight's agenda, you will need to press *3 each time to be placed back in the queue for comment. Public comment will be limited to 90 minutes total per item. The first 1 to 15 participants in the queue have 3 minutes to speak. The next 16 to 25 participants in the queue have 2 minutes to speak. And if time remains, the next 26 plus participants in the queue have 1.5 minutes each to speak until we reach 90 minutes. Again, the number is 855-695-3744. And don't forget to press *3 to be placed in the queue. Screeners will ask callers for their first and last name, neighborhood, and the agenda item the caller would like to comment on. Please call several minutes before the agenda item and press *3 to ensure you are in the queue for comment. Public comment will also be taken during the public comment section for topics that are not on tonight's agenda using the previously outlined. And I'm going to repeat it again. The number is 855-695-3744, but don't forget to be placed *3 if you want to speak. The City Council meeting is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Anderson. Anderson. Castriata.
Here.
Groom.
Here.
Hinkle. Here. Jezerski. Jezerski. Law Evans.
Here.
Lim.
Here.
Lindstedt.
Here.
Schaff.
Here.
Tessier.
Here.
Quorum is present. Will everyone please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In an effort to keep order for tonight's meeting, I ask council to please utilize the video conferencing tools to raise your hand for comment or when making a motion or a second. I will call on the first hand raised to state the motion and the second to make the second as appropriate. I ask council members to limit their comments to 5 minutes. Abby will be assisting with the timekeeping and will provide council members with a notification via video conferencing chat when 1 minute remains. Please ensure you are on mute when I'm speaking. If a council member needs to leave the meeting, please inform me before doing so. We will plan on a 10-minute break at approximately 8 p.m. We will begin with council's review and approval of this evening's agenda. Council may add or remove items to the consent agenda, or council may revise the order of business for the meeting. Does any member of the council have any comments or questions regarding this evening's agenda? Noting none. Well, we do have 2 items tonight under petitions or communications, and let the record reflect that Lori Anderson has joined. The first this evening is a proclamation declaring May as Mental Health Awareness Month. Will the clerk please read the proclamation?
Proclamation declaring May 2021 as Mental Health Awareness Month in the City and County of Broomfield, Colorado. Whereas mental health is the #1 health concern identified by Broomfield residents, and whereas our culture around how we address and treat mental health impacts our workforce, leaders, neighbors, and community members, and whereas research shows that mental health issues have been increasing since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly for minority populations. In 2019, more than 1 in 3 LGBTQ Coloradans reported not being able to access mental health services when they needed them, compared to 1 in 7 people identifying as heterosexual, with Broomfield and Boulder having the highest rates of being unable to access services compared to other health statistic regions. And whereas our community must address mental health as a public health concern and continue to enhance the strategies of the behavioral health plan as a community to strengthen individuals, families, and organizations. And whereas neighbors, family members, and professionals alike have the ability to emphasize the importance of taking care of one's mental health by talking about it, destigmatizing behavioral health issues, and offering resources to those in need. And whereas the City and County of Broomfield believes addressing mental health stigma, access to care, and increasing community connectedness are crucial elements of embracing positive mental health for all. We act in partnership with our community mental health agencies, as well as other critical partners, including human services, library, recreation services, police, and all community stakeholders to move the needle towards positive mental health for all in our community. And whereas all this month we encourage individuals, government institutions, businesses, community associations in our community to acknowledge and support each other and our own mental health as we continue to work through the COVID-19 pandemic together in the City and County of Broomfield. Now, therefore, Patrick Quinn, Mayor of the City and County of Broomfield, does hereby declare and proclaim the month of May 2021 as Mental Health Awareness Month in Broomfield. Mayor Quinn invites all citizens in the community to use this month to raise awareness around behavioral health in the Broomfield community. In witness whereof, Mayor Quinn hereunto sets his hand and official seal on this 27th day of April 2021.
Thank you. I will, and I'll give recognition. That's Samantha Monroe from the clerk's office that read the proclamation. Thank you so much. Well, I'm not seeing any people from the public that would like to speak on this. And then I will ask if there's any members of council that would like to have a comment on this proclamation. Noting none, which doesn't mean there isn't a huge appreciation of the proclamation, but we have a busy schedule. We'll move on to our second and our last item under petitions and communications, which is an update from Congressman DeGoose on the American Rescue Plan. We appreciate Congressman DeGoose for joining us this evening. I presume Congressman DeGoose is on, and it's your floor. There you are. Good to see you, Congressman. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Quinn. I'll be brief. I thank you first and foremost for having me and for all that you do for the city of Broomfield, and certainly very grateful for your leadership, Mr. Mayor, as well as Mayor Pro Tem Castriata and every member of the council. And I appreciate your indulgence in giving us the opportunity to come by and say a few words about all the developments in Washington, D.C. It's certainly been a very busy few months, and we thought that it would be beneficial to provide you all with just a brief update as to some of the developments in our nation's capital. First, I'm sure as every one of you knows that we passed the American Rescue Plan a few weeks ago. The plan, in my view, will save lives and livelihoods by putting vaccines in arms, getting kids back to school, sending stimulus checks directly to those who need it most, and providing support for the hardest hit small businesses in Broomfield and across our state with extended EIDL grants and expanded PPP eligibility. In addition, one thing that I wanted to be sure to flag for all of you and for the Broomfield community, we worked very hard, as the Mayor Pro Tem and the Mayor are undoubtedly aware because they were involved in these efforts, to secure local stabilization funds for cities and counties, and in particular for cities and counties with a population of less than 500,000, which was the, in my view, rigid and narrow population limit adopted in the CARES Act over a year ago. And we are grateful that thanks to those efforts, and again, want to thank all of the folks on the Broomfield City Council for their involvement in this regard. We were able to include a provision within the American Rescue Plan for local relief, $3.9 billion in state relief and money for local governments. My understanding is that approximately $6.96 million should be coming directly to the town of Broomfield. And then, of course, because Broomfield is a hybrid community of both a city and a county, another $14 million as far as your county jurisdictional priorities are concerned. So bringing it to a total of roughly $20 million, and very excited about that infusion of resources that the Broomfield City Council will be able to appropriate to the needs of our community, and very excited to learn more about the ways in which you all will expend those dollars, and certainly want to be helpful to the extent that you need any guidance from the Treasury Department, and if we can be helpful in expediting that guidance, which we've certainly been pushing for on behalf of other cities and communities in our congressional district. There are a number of other provisions in the American Rescue Plan. I know that everyone on today's call is certainly aware of them, so I won't go through those ad nauseum, but suffice to say that if folks are wanting to learn more about the various different relief programs and provisions that were part of the American Rescue Plan, you can go onto our website at negoose.house.gov, which provides a more detailed breakdown. Also would say that we're not resting on our laurels, and notwithstanding the great progress that was made through the American Rescue Plan, we are taking very seriously the need for infrastructure investment, and the president has announced a very ambitious, bold proposal in the American Jobs Plan. That will be followed up, we believe, tomorrow with the American Families Plan, which the president will likely announce during the joint session of Congress that myself and other colleagues will attend. The American Jobs Act includes significant dollars for highway surface transportation projects, many of which would inure to the people of Broomfield. And certainly we continue to have conversations with all of you and appreciate your feedback as to the priorities as far as transportation is concerned, multimodal, more conventional surface transportation projects and such that are needed. And so we want to make sure that those are addressed as part of the American Jobs Act. We're pretty excited at the potential for that to become a reality. There are a number of other priorities we're pursuing as part of the American Jobs Act: wildfire resiliency projects, trying to expand early childhood education, and more. But I will simply say that we count on you for your ideas and your suggestions. We get the best suggestions and ideas from local leadership, from constituents, from the very talented and wise and engaged citizens that we represent together as elected officials in Broomfield. And so I would hope that each of you know that there's an open door to feel free to reach out to me personally or to Jill Grano, our Director of Community Affairs, who's on the line anytime. And the same goes for any citizens who are watching today's virtual proceedings, to please reach out to us so that we could be the vehicle for accomplishing positive legislation that benefits our community. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor, and happy to take a question or two if you'd like. And again, just appreciate the opportunity to say a few words.
Yeah, I'll go to public comments, Congressman, we allow for public comments on virtually every item, during a meeting. So, but there's nobody from the public commenting. So we'll go to City Council question comments. I did want to say one thing to you that, first of all, thank you for your efforts on the Rescue Act, and clearly, I think the city, unless there's a whole bunch of regulations issued in the last few days, the city's looking for whatever guidance we can get from the Treasury or whoever's going to provide the guidance on how to spend that $20 million, because as you all know, the act was fairly vague, and so we're a cautious town. We want to make sure we're spending the money in the right places. So I'm sure we'll take you up on that and contact your office a few times. So with that said, is there anybody any council members want to make comments? If so, raise your hand. Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Evans. Are you having trouble raising your hand, or?
No, I just wanted to make sure that you saw me. So thank you. I think I raised it.
Oh, there you are.
But, yep. At any rate, thank you for recognizing me. Congressman Neguse, thank you for your service on behalf of all of our citizens. The question I have, I certainly applaud the attempt to help citizens and cities and communities and counties get back on our feet after the pandemic. The question I have is, I'm a small business person. My husband and I own our own commercial real estate company. And as I'm sure you're aware, in real estate, in order to get a loan, in order to get money advanced to you, the lender has to be reasonably sure, has to be very sure that you have a very high probability of being able to pay it back. And I had the same qualms with the past federal administration as I do now, which is there's no reasonable path forward here in terms of paying this back. From what I can see, I am very worried that our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and on into the future are going to be either have an outcome of being saddled with a huge debt that they have no way to repay, or we're going to start seeing inflation that will be very detrimental to all of us. And that's my, I have no specific questions about the act itself, but I'd like to know what provisions are either in the act or being discussed in terms of repayment or otherwise, I don't even know how to say it, otherwise dealing with this, this huge advance of funds on behalf of American taxpayers.
Thank you, Councilwoman, for the question, and I certainly appreciate your thoughtful feedback. And I'd say two things. First, just with respect to the point that the mayor mentioned, because it dovetails with what you referenced, I do think it's important for the cities and the counties in our state to proceed cautiously, and I'm grateful that the city and county of Broomfield is doing so, because there are clawback provisions within the regulations that the Department of Treasury has promulgated previously as it related to the CARES Act, and I suspect the same will be true for the funds that are allocated as part of the American Rescue Plan. So if cities and counties are not spending those monies appropriately and as Congress intended and as the Treasury Department ultimately intends, there is a real risk, of course, justifiably so, of those funds being clawed back. And that's important. Nonetheless, I think your broader concern is one that we should take seriously. And, obviously, we should be cognizant of the risks associated with deficit spending. I would tell you that while I too, worry about ensuring that at the federal level we're spending our resources appropriately and that the deficit does not grow to such a large number that the government is incapable of taking steps to to curb excessive or unnecessary spending. In the conversations that I've been a part of, various sessions, roundtables with, for example, Secretary Yellen, of course, a former chair of the Federal Reserve, it's been made abundantly clear to me, and I think to others, and most experts and academics agree, that there is less of an inflationary concern today and in the near term, as much as there is, or rather was, concern about bouncing back and ensuring that sufficient resources were invested in the economy to ensure that we addressed what at one point was an unemployment rate that had skyrocketed into the double digits. Of course, that's now been mitigated, and because of intentional action by Broomfield, by state leaders, and by the Congress, we've been able to really curb the lagging, the double-digit unemployment rate that existed. But nonetheless, that still exists in different parts of our country, and it's why the investments in the American Rescue Plan were so important. I would tell you, though, that again, I don't want you to think that concern falls on deaf ears. As we talk about the American Jobs Act, for example, the infrastructure bill, there's a very vigorous debate happening in Washington around the pay-fors. And I think many of us have made clear that we believe that at least some part of that bill needs to be paid for. And there are various different ways to do that, obviously, within the tax code. So, obviously that might not be as much as I think you'd probably like to see based on what you said, but I think it's a start, and certainly it's something that I'll continue to keep in mind.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Groom.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your time tonight. I appreciate it. Just a quick question. Is there any brief way to go over what we can spend the funds on, or maybe even a briefer way of what we cannot spend the funds on? Whichever way, just to give us a little synopsis. I'm sure it's fairly lengthy, but
it's a great
is there
question,
any
Councilwoman.
heads up?
No, it's a wonderful question, and it's a question that was posed to me by Fort Collins City Councilor as well. And I will say, you probably might not like the answer. I will ultimately defer to the IRS and Treasury Department regulations that I'm hoping are going to be promulgated in the near term, hopefully within the next week or two. Many members of Congress have been petitioning the Treasury Department, imploring them to issue the regulations. I would just add this caveat. The reason why the language in the statute was vaguer in the American Rescue Plan than it was in the CARES Act is because we wanted to provide local leadership, local leaders like yourself, with maximum flexibility within the confines of the law to address challenges that exist in Broomfield. And so that really is why that language was much broader. Obviously, the Treasury Department, I think, is going to put out what I hope to be fairly detailed specifications about what you can't do. And I would also encourage you and the city and county manager that as you all are embarking on this process, please feel free to reach out to Director Grano in our office, because she can be very helpful in triaging, if you will, different specific questions about funds that you intend to spend in terms of evaluating the Treasury regulations and working with DOLA, because DOLA obviously will also probably end up issuing some guidance based off of the Treasury guidelines that are issued. So wish I had a better answer for you, but that's
no worries. I was just looking for a little headliner, but we'll wait patiently. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your efforts working on our behalf in Congress. You know, this last year has been really challenging for everyone in public service and for every community. You know, we came in at the start of this pandemic with a really uncertain financial outlook. You know, huge worries about what the future will hold. And because of your work and because of the work of this Congress, we're moving forward with major infrastructure plans, and our budget situation's feeling a lot better. So I just wanted to say thank you for all the work you've been doing, and I look forward to sending you a long list of all the things that Broomfield does with that money here as we look toward building back. And I guess my final thoughts are, thank you for all your work on childhood poverty and on the childhood tax credit. It's a huge deal for so many families here in Broomfield and across the Front Range. So that's all I have, and I really, really appreciate you joining our meeting.
Congressman, the city manager Hoffman wanted to make sure that I pointed out that Jill has been incredibly helpful in getting information to us and answering questions. And so we do look forward to working with your office in the future. I also just wanted to make a comment because I got an email today from the Northwest Metro Mayors, county commissioners, and I'll point out that the very last tour of the Capitol last March, was led by you. If you recall, the Capitol tours ended, and Councilmember Schaaf and I were on that tour. And I heard today that you are going to, and I can't remember what the phrase is. I need to be careful on how I say this, but for a community grant request, that you are going to do 119, which was a request, from our Northwest Mayors and Commissioners Coalition. So I just wanted to thank you for that, since I had you on the line.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, we are likely to restart tours in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill in the next few weeks. So perhaps you all can make a journey back out so you can be the first tour, since you were the last that I did before COVID happened. And I should have announced, of course, I buried the lead, but of course, Highway 119, as you mentioned, within the American Jobs Act, every member of Congress will have an opportunity to secure member designated projects, specific projects that they believe should be expressly funded within the text of the bill. And at the very top of our list is Highway 119, the $5 million funding gap that was identified by the Northwest mayors, and including, of course, Mayor Quinn and folks in Broomfield. So very excited about that. We're going to push, and I feel reasonably optimistic. Obviously, there's a long way to go still, but we're excited about the road ahead.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. We will, we've got a busy meeting, so we'll move on, but we always appreciate your time. Anytime you want to come speak to us, we'll give you the time. I want to note for the record that Councilmember Jezierski is in the meeting. And so we'll move on to public comments for items that are not on the agenda. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on matters other than the items already listed on this evening's agenda. To be placed in the queue for comment, please call 855-695-3744 and press *3. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes. I'm not noting anyone for public comments, so we're going to go ahead and move on to Council's community and event updates, which is next. I did want to take a moment, though, before I go to the other members of the council, and remind the public that there is a special council meeting this Thursday, April 29th at 6 p.m. The agenda is focused on 4 oil and gas related items that can be viewed at broomfield.org/council. The meeting was added to allow the public the opportunity to share their comments publicly on oil and gas, air quality monitoring, the Davis 43-6 plugged and abandoned wells, subsurface methane issues, and proposed reverse setbacks regarding oil and gas facilities. There will be time for public comment that evening. As described earlier, we will allow for 90 minutes, 1 to 5 participants, or the first 1 to 5 participants get 3 minutes, the next 16 to 25 get 2 minutes, and then whatever's remaining gets 5 minutes. And so there will be public comment after each presentation. We will have a complete presentation by the experts on the air quality. So anyway, so that's Thursday on April 29th. We'll go to council members. Any other comments council members want to make on community updates? Noting none. Once again, I think it's probably recognition of the evening. Noting none, we'll move on to council's consideration of the consent agenda. Following the clerk's reading of consent agenda items 7A through 7G, we will ask for public comments. Will the clerk please read agenda items 7A through 7G by title?
7A, approval of minutes, April 13, 2021, regular council meeting. 7B, resolution number 2021-82, authorizing and approving a maintenance agreement with Motorola Solutions, Inc. for radio communications equipment maintenance and monitoring. 7C, resolution number 2021-55, authorizing and approving an agreement by and between the City and County of Broomfield and Western States Reclamation, Inc. for the 2021 city-owned concrete replacement program. 7D, resolution number 2021-52, authorizing and approving an agreement by and between the City and County of Broomfield and Martin Marietta Materials, Inc. for the 2021 pavement preservation program. And resolution number 2021-53, authorizing and approving an agreement by and between the City and County of Broomfield and A1 Chip Seal Company for the 2021 pavement preservation program. 7E, resolution number 2021-62, authorizing and approving a utility easement and temporary construction easement by and between the City and County of Broomfield and United Power to use and occupy certain portions of Broomfield city-owned tracts located within Palisade Park, filing number 6 along County Road 4 and County Road 7. 7F is resolution number 2021-75, authorizing and approving an intergovernmental agreement between the City and County of Broomfield and the Regional Transportation District through the Transportation Improvement Program for Flex Ride, Congestion Mitigation, Air Quality funding for 2021 through 2024. And 7G, resolution number 2021-91, approving election precinct boundaries.
Thank you, Ms. Moreau. We do have a gentleman that wants to speak on 7E. Mike, please state your full name and your neighborhood, and you have 3 minutes. Mike? Kathy, do we have Mike on the line?
He appears to be, yes.
We can keep.
This is Mike. I wanted to comment on item E, is in Edward.
Right. It's his time to comment. He is.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm Mike Schweitzer. I live at 3298 County Road 4 in Erie. So I live on the County Road 4, where you're planning on putting in the new power line. I live just to the south of there. Pacific Palisades North, the Broomfield new development is to the north of that line. So I just was curious. I have 2 questions. One is, who are you going to power with this power line? And is it going to go all the way east of Huron to the commercial distribution center? Or is it going to just stay with Palisade Park? And number 2, because you have homes, residential homes so close to this line. I hope you're going to do as much as you possibly can to mitigate any health issues that might be, such as burying the pipe as deep as possible. So that's all I had. Thank you so much for letting me comment. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead because he did comment, and we did put on the consent agenda that I'm going to make the exception tonight and allow Katie Allen to address the issues that he raised. Katie?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, Katie Allen, City and County Engineer. So the line is being installed by United Power, not Broomfield, and the alignment is shown in the vicinity map. So it starts in County Road 4 at the Palisade, filing number 6 subdivision, and then it heads west and then heads north out of Broomfield up County Road 7. Our piece, the easement, is, if you can see the vicinity map, is shown in yellow. And then it continues on to the north. We will pass along to United Power your concerns. They have regulations which will dictate the depth of that line and how it's buried as a power company. And I hope that answers your questions. Okay, and then you have his email address too, Katie. I mean, if you wanted to connect with him directly. Sure. So there aren't any, I'm not noting any other public comments. I'll go to City Council. Does any member of City Council have any comments that they want to make? Or have, I guess, yeah, we'll go with questions now on any of the items. Councilmember Lim?
Yes, on item 7F, the IGA on the Transportation Improvement Program for FlexRide. I wanted to thank Transportation Manager Grant for noting in the application that our original request was to try to expand FlexRide north of 144 and into Skystone. Obviously, that's important for many reasons, but both areas have 55 plus communities. And so that would be good if the FlexRide could be expanded there. I noted that Ms. Grant said that in the memo that the RTD itself had the final decision, and it was determined that it would not be expanded into that area. So I am wondering, I guess, I know there's budget constraints, but I'm hoping someday that we'll be able to expand FlexRide into that area north of 144 and Skystone. So that's, if she wants to address that, that would be
great. Ms. Grant, did you want to address that? You turned your camera on.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim. I believe I caught most of that. They were just letting me into the room. I believe your question is around the expansion that was noted in the grant. So currently, they will add service into the existing service areas in the Broomfield FlexRide area, and they will be working with staff, and I will be working with RTD to look to see for opportunities to expand north of 144. At this time, for this current service plan, we will not be expanding, but we will look at future cycles. And I will note that I do believe that Skystone is in service today, and I will follow up with an email to confirm that with you. I've also working with them on point deviations, and they have approved most of those point deviations as well. I'll be happy to share that information with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Anderson.
Oh, thank you. I lowered my hand because that was the same question I had, was service to Anthem Ranch. So okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Before asking for a motion, I want to remind everyone that item 7F is an intergovernmental agreement and requires 2/3 approval of council. Is there a motion that the recommendation contained in the staff reports for agenda items 7A through 7G be approved? Mayor Pro Tem.
So moved.
Is there a second? Councilmember Henkel.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Anderson?
Yes.
Castriata?
Yes.
Broom?
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Kuzinski,
Yes.
Ma Evans,
Yes.
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Staff,
Yes.
Tessier.
Yes.
It passes unanimously. There is no business before the Board of Social Services this evening. This evening, we do have the COVID-19 update for the Board of Health review. The meeting of the Board of Health is now called to order. We'll ask the clerk to call the roll for the Board of Health.
Anderson, Castriata,
Here.
Groom,
Here.
Hinkle,
Here.
Kuzinski,
Here. I'm here.
Ma Evans,
Here.
Lim,
Here.
Lindstedt,
Here.
Staff,
Here.
Tessier.
A quorum is present. The board members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which staff will summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. Jason Volling, Director of Public Health, will walk us through this COVID-19 update. Jason?
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman, and good evening, board members. Yesterday, we provided an in-depth presentation on the latest with COVID in Broomfield and in the state. So key points I want to highlight, and it was mentioned today during the governor's press conference, is we're starting to see a stabilization in cases and percent positivity, especially in those counties with high vaccination rates, which is showing that the vaccine is working. And we expect to see hopefully that continue as we get more and more vaccine out to our residents. Unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is increased cases among school-age children, specifically middle school and high school. We're looking at our exposure data, and we believe this is primarily being driven outside of the school setting. So in household gatherings, household transmission, or just in community transmission. Unfortunately, we're seeing more hospitalizations in younger age groups, and this may be due to the variants as they are more severe. Specifically, the B.1.1.7 is the primary variant and is more contagious as well. And then what the state has presented is that they looked at the 7-day moving average of hospitalizations and compared it for those that were unvaccinated versus those that were vaccinated. And what they saw was a striking difference in the hospitalizations, primarily occurring in obviously those that are unvaccinated. So we're seeing that the clinical trial data and evidence is actually playing out in the community setting. Most of you heard that Johnson & Johnson has been authorized for use again as of April 23rd. Part of that is that we will have our own fact sheets that are approved by the CDC that will be educating residents on that are interested in receiving the J&J vaccine and the potential side effects that are associated with those, which again are extremely rare, but we do that with all vaccines. The other thing is we've really addressed hitting our community that wants the vaccine. We're moving into this place of that wait and see group that is interested in convenience. They're waiting to see what are the potential, if the vaccine works or if it doesn't work. And so as we start to target more and work with this population, we'll be moving away from our large scale events because it's becoming harder to fill those up and we don't want to waste doses that we have. And doing more targeted efforts, specifically with our pharmacy partners, with work sites, community-based organizations, and others. And then lastly, 67% of our population have initiated or completed their vaccines. We're seeing a higher percent in Broomfield County that are actually completing their second dose compared to the state and the metro region. And that's great. That's why we want people to be fully vaccinated to be able to get back to some of the normal activities they have in their daily lives. And then lastly, with our mask order, state mask order expires on May 3rd. Our local order expires on May 7th. The regional health departments are discussing whether or not they're going to extend their local mask orders. We're going to see what the state does with the state order and see what the other counties are planning to do. And I should have more information to provide to this group either late this week or early next week on what the rest of the region will be doing in this area in the state. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. We'll proceed with public comments. If there's anyone who would like to be heard, please press *3. State your first and last name and neighborhood for the record. I'm not noting anybody on this item, so I'll move to board member questions, and I'll start with board member Tessier.
And I really wanted to reiterate, I appreciate the videos of the recorded sessions that you do. I got a chance to watch it and just wanted to thank my fellow council members for asking such great questions. I listened specifically for this one question, and I didn't get a chance to speak with anybody earlier, but I recently got a question in from a resident about her son receiving the second vaccination in 20 days versus 30 days. Is that common, or because typically it's like been 30 days to or exactly a month, and she was a little concerned that it was 10 days earlier. Just wondering if you had any insights on that.
Councilmember Tessier, I would have to look at that specific situation. Typically, when people receive their first dose, depending on which vaccine it is, they're immediately scheduled for their second dose. And it's based on what the prescribed ideal timeline is for people to get that second dose. So
okay, I'll be in touch with you then to give you the
reach
details.
out to us offline. We can follow up on that and make sure that we address it. I would like to also say, though, if people do miss their second dose vaccine when it's scheduled, because we do know just life situations come up, all of the community sites that the state is sponsoring is accepting people to come in and receive second doses. And those are all walk-up sites, so you don't need to have an appointment. So I do want to get that message out to our community. If you, by chance, miss your second dose, you can call who you originally had it scheduled with, or you could go to another site to get it.
Then I had one other question, and that had to do with like the studies that have been coming out on, wearing masks or not wearing masks. And I'm wondering if we've discussed this prior to tonight, and I'm wondering if, and I didn't have a chance to check the website, and I was wondering if you had put kind of that information about those particular studies and what they actually mean, what they didn't record, and because I think there's a lot of confusion, and I feel like the best policy is still wearing masks and still, social distancing and whatnot. And I just wanted to see what your comments were on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Tessier, and Councilmember Schaaf brought this up yesterday as well with a mask article that was published, and you read the headlines associated with it, but when you dig deeper into the research, you get more at looking at the specific journal that it's published in, what the actual hypothesis is, the methodology, the results, and with that, there's always strengths and limitations to every study. And the one that you shared with me, we had major concerns with, obviously, with some of the methodology and the conclusions. And I think we can start to make sure we're sharing those more broadly with the community, because there is so much information going out there. But again, overwhelmingly, the public health scientists have all found that masks are extremely effective, specifically in indoor settings. And I do want to note that the CDC today, following some of the research we were doing in Colorado, have decided that they're going to lift the mask requirements as far as outdoor settings. And that's due to low community transmission in outdoor settings, especially if you're vaccinated.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just want to do a shout out to Broomfield residents for getting vaccinated. Like, rock on. We are like killing it. And I'm like so proud of Broomfield. So thank you, everybody. And thanks for all the messaging your team has done. So great.
Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mr. Vallon, thank you for the presentation, and to the public health team, again, thank you for all of your work. You know, something that's concerning to me is that we're seeing a rapid increase in the cases amongst our children and youth. Especially, you know, this comes at a time which schools are trying to finish out this year, and just later this, I guess next month, it's not quite May 1st, but this next month they'll be finishing school. So, you know, the finish line for them is right on the horizon, but this rapid increase has got me concerned. And you mentioned that there's a correlation between the vaccine rate and the number of cases in Colorado. And I'm curious, how does that correlation affect the rising cases that we're seeing in children and in youth?
Yeah, so the correlation is specifically looking at those that are eligible to receive the vaccine, and obviously not our children, because they are not yet eligible. So they did that specific, the state CDPHE did that analysis with the Colorado School of Public Health, and they compared counties where they had high vaccination rates in those eligible populations against counties where they had low vaccination rates. And they looked at large counties to make sure they had a large enough sample size. And there was obviously a strong correlation between having higher vaccination rates and lower cases and lower percent positivity.
So are we seeing there's a correlation in terms of those counties with rising case numbers, also rising children and youth cases as well? Or is that rapidly rising children and youth cases regardless of county?
I'll have to look specifically at that part of the study, Councilmember Schaaf, but what I can tell you is as you get more and more of your county vaccinated, you start to see community transmission go down, and that's our ultimate goal. And so you're not going to have as much of the potential risk for children that are not eligible to be vaccinated to contract COVID. And so again, key message is if we could get the vast majority of our population that's eligible right now to get the vaccine, that can reduce community transmission, hopefully not lead to additional cases. And then secondly, we'll still have to, and I mentioned this on yesterday's call, as we begin to move towards the reopening phase and level clear, we're still going to have strong public health guidance that's out there for all sectors and for our community to follow. I think it's just best common sense and common practice that, you know, if you have children that are not vaccinated, you probably want to be a little bit more cautious in the settings that you're going and be thoughtful. You know, do you want to take your children to a large indoor setting event where you may not know who's vaccinated and not vaccinated in that situation? So we're going to try and get as much of these public health messaging out there in addition to what we're seeing as far as our community transmission.
All right, thank you, Mr. Valling.
Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I had one question for you, Director Valling. I'm pretty concerned about equity of access for vaccines and the availability of vaccines to people who maybe don't work traditional work hours. I apologize if this question was asked on Monday. I'm double booked on those meetings, so I just wanted to express that concern and see what.
Yeah, that's exactly what our team is looking at right now. We're moving away from a mass community vaccine clinic that's only available during 1 day out of the week or 2 days out of the week with certain hours to how do we make it more convenient, especially for those people that, even though they're eligible to get time off of work, it may not just work into the normal day. And so looking at ways that we could do it during off hours, doing weekends, bringing the vaccine to communities, work sites, again, where we might have a higher percentage of those individuals that are not vaccinated at this point in time. And then lastly, how do we make it as convenient as possible? And some of that is also working with our pharmacy partners once we start to see the supply and demand change of what can our pharmacy partners also do of moving towards accepting walk-ins and other things like that as well. So I think we're definitely seeing a change in the availability of vaccine and the access to it.
Thank you.
Councilor Law Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Velling, I very much appreciate the update, and much like Councilmember Lindstedt, I am not available very often on Monday afternoons. So clearly this is moving along very, very well overall, nationally and statewide, which is certainly a relief, I think, for a lot of us. And clearly, as we move towards the end of the school year, I guess one of the things that I wonder about is at next school year, my daughter's at Regis University, and I know school districts are grappling with whether or not they should require students and teachers and everybody to be vaccinated. And certainly there are other industries that are discussing this. And a question that I've not seen posed or discussed very often is how am I, as a citizen, going to prove that I've been vaccinated? I've got this little card that's really easy to forge. It's got both, it's got my name on it and my handwriting, but there's no seal, there's no signature, there's a lot number. How are we going to proceed? And this is not a political statement for all my political friends out there who feel that vaccine passports and whatnot are a terrible idea. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm simply, for those of us who wish to be able to prove to whomever's satisfaction that I've been vaccinated, how do I do that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And we're still working through that with the state on what that looks like. What I could tell you, and I shared this on yesterday's update, is the state has sort of a centralized electronic health record. It's the Colorado Immunization Information System, and all providers have access to that. And so if you're going to see your doctor and you got your vaccine through a pharmacy, they could go in and see that. What we're talking about is then how do we take it to that next step? Again, like schools is a great example where you, for other vaccines, have to have that proof of vaccine status. And you often go to your provider and the provider can say, okay, I can sign off and show that you've received these vaccines on these dates. So for those settings, it's pretty clear. With some of the other settings, those are some of the issues we're still working out with the state.
Okay, so follow-up questions. I'm sure that I'm not the only one who's got the digital ID on our phones. I don't know if you can see that. Maybe it just looks whited out. At any rate, that's my digital driver's license. Is that a method of verification that's being considered? And also, follow-up question number 2, is there a way that I can go look and make sure that the state has my personal record of being vaccinated? Not a political statement, not a political question. I just want to make sure that they know that I've been vaccinated.
Yeah, there's a couple ways you could do that. You could obviously call your primary care provider, as I mentioned before, and they could see within the system. The second thing I would say, I have heard that people are accepting sort of that digital photo of I've been vaccinated and here's my doses, but I don't know that that's necessarily the direction everybody's going to go. So as I mentioned before, this is sort of the policy discussion that is happening at the state level that we'll just have to wait for more information to come out on what that means. But for travel, for example, I know some states are requiring if you travel to them or you need to show proof of vaccination. Well, calling them and figuring out what does that look like to show proof of vaccination, it sometimes is dependent on what's the specific sector that you're dealing with.
Sure. Okay. Very good. Thank you so much for all your hard work. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, noting no other questions or comments from the board, we will we'll adjourn this meeting and move on to the next one. This evening, the Broomfield Housing Authority will consider proposed resolution number 2021-95-HA, adopting the Second Amendment to the 2021 Housing Authority budget. Item 11E is also a budget resolution on this evening's agenda for the city and county budget needing council's review. For the purposes of coordination and in the interest of time, we will review both item 10A and item 11E concurrently. I would also note that we will be consolidating the public comment period into one public comment period for both budget items. So the meeting of the Broomfield Housing Authority is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Anderson?
Here.
Castriata?
Here.
Groom?
Here.
Hinkle? Here. Jezierski?
Here.
Law Evans?
Here.
Lim?
Here.
Lindstedt? Lindstedt?
Yeah, you're having a little trouble with your sound there, but he's here.
Schaff?
Here.
Tessier?
Here.
The quorum is present. Council and the Housing Authority have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which staff will summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a long-awaited conversation that is the culmination of about 18 months of moving through COVID and wanting to recognize the employees that have put forth exceptional effort every day through the ambiguity, through the uncertainty, through furloughs, through shutdowns, through 25 to 50% to 75%. Our employees never skipped a beat. And this is in recognition of them. I want to thank all of council, the mayor and mayor pro tem, and the questions from Councilmember Groom with regards to the merit pool, the market adjustments. So with that, Brenda's going to walk us through what this package looks like. The agreement was that we would have this completed by June 1st so that our folks could see them on their paychecks. We were able to gather the information from HR and finance, a significant lift to expedite this. Thanks to all of them. We're going to walk through the merit pool, the market adjustments. Additionally, a one-time annual leave payout for all of our employees that had occurred 1-for-1. They were the employees, when you worked an hour, you got an additional hour. We have a policy now that employees can gain or gather up to 320 hours a year. And then on December 31st, all of those hours that are over 320, they lose. So they understand that that's been a standing policy. With the extraordinary year that we've had, a lot of folks that had high balances to begin with have now pushed over. We rolled those hours over in 2020, but again, no one could have anticipated that COVID would take us into half of 2021. Rather than carrying that liability on the books, we'd like to clean that up again with a one-time payout of those employees. HR and finance, upon your approval, will be sending 326 employees a request form. They can either do nothing for those that intend to leave in 2021 and or retire. They can get those full payouts. Because again, these are hours that they've accumulated and they do belong to them. Or we can do that one-time cash payout, or they can move the funds into their 457 plan. These are not hours that they currently have. It was as of December 31st, 2020. And again, it's the one-time pay. While we were moving through all of the finances for the employees, it's equity pay. So we had an audit. Federal government enacted the Federal Pay Act January of last year. Some communities wanted to and are waiting to see how the legalities shake out before implementing that. We took a different approach, which was to bring an auditor in to audit all of our employees where they were in the pay ranges, and then indicating that the ranges would be modified. We fell a little behind, that we wanted to increase those to the 2021 pay range. So you'll also see some shoring up, if you will, for that equity pay. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda. She can walk through the specifics, and then we'll be available for questions. We sure appreciate your support. Brenda?
Sure thing. Thank you, City Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council, as well as members of the authority. Brenda Ritchie, Chief Financial Officer. The items for consideration this evening request amending the 2021 City and County, as well as the Broomfield Housing Authority budgets to reflect the proposed items related to personnel as introduced by City Manager Hoffman. As discussed and reviewed on April 13th, the preliminary budget rollover from 2020 really allows us for the staff to propose this merit pool and market adjustments in 2021, which addresses the general employee merit, the police market and minimum market adjustments, which account for salary ranges that may have shifted in the past year for specific positions. Also increasing the exceptional merit pool by 1% for providing bonus opportunities to those employees who made exceptional contributions during the pandemic. Another aspect of the proposed amendments are to address the significant amount of annual leave, as Ms. Hoffman indicated, that were accrued by employees during the pandemic. Employees that worked on site or in the field at the onset of the pandemic received an additional accrual for those hours worked and with limited opportunities for use. Therefore, there's a one-time payout for the hours worked in excess of that 320-hour threshold is proposed in the amount of approximately 1.3 million. The final element of the proposed budget amendments this evening relate to the personnel are in response to the 2019 legislation regarding that Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. The City and County Human Resources Department, along with Graves Consulting, conducted that pay equity audit of all Broomfield positions. And as a result, there were certain pay disparities that existed requiring a salary adjustment. Based on the information contained in the memo and presented this evening by City Manager Hoffman and myself, staff is requesting the consideration and approval of the amended budget for both the City and County of Broomfield, along with the Broomfield Housing Authority by resolution, for the total fiscal impact of roughly $4 million. It should be noted that there are interfund transfers, and that what that is it includes from the city general fund to be transferred to those other areas, such as recreation or the library fund, as employees sit in different funds. And so that's where that additional amount for the interfund transfers comes into play. And that concludes the staff's presentation this evening, and would be happy to answer any questions the council or board may have.
We'll go to public comments. If there's anybody from the public that would like to be heard, press *3 if you're in the queue. I don't note anybody in the queue, so we can go to questions from the council and Housing Authority are next. Are there any question items on 10A and 11E, council? Councilmember Lim.
Yes, I support the equity pay increases, but I was wondering if anyone would be able to comment in a general sense about what was pointed out in the equity pay audit, lessons learned for the future in that. Would that be a violation of anything for staff to comment on that?
I don't believe so, Jean, but I'm not a lawyer and I don't like to practice being one. But there are names attached. I'm sure that working with Nancy, we could follow up and redact the personal information and give you an overview of it was by gender as well as for the BIPOC community. Nancy, do you have anything additional on that?
Yeah, City Manager Hoffman is correct. We can create a summary that would remove any identifiable information that would pinpoint a particular employee and give you aggregate conclusions or observations from what we've discovered.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Councilmember Lim, one last thing. Brenda, can you give just the total number, just from a scope perspective, of the number of employees that were highlighted?
Sure thing. Actually, we did it in a couple of phases. So I can provide that number. If you give me a second, I can come back to the council with that information. I don't have that right off the top of my head right now.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Groom.
All right, thank you. And wow, I know that was a lot to culminate and put together. Wonderful job. I can't thank you guys enough for incorporating the excess of 320 hours. That was just what a benefit that is to our employees, because it was really hard to go anywhere, nonetheless, utilize that vacation time. So, but just a question. So I think that was an amazing bonus, just a little nicety to do for the employees. But a question in regards to the 320, because I know a lot of our employees always get to that limit of 320 at the end of the year. Have we ever looked at possibly attaching something to performance reviews to say, hey, you better start using it? I know my company, we have unlimited vacation, but it's a ding on our performance appraisal if you don't use vacation in the year, because it's a mental health, it just means so much. So are we ever kind of considering just making sure employees use that benefit?
So that's an interesting question, and one that we have been discussing for the last 9 months.
Oh, okay, good.
How to actually, through that method, Councilmember Groom, but a whole host of others, to ensure that A, we're modeling the way, B,
yes,
right, that
yes.
it trickles down, so it can't, just not from the CMO to the department heads, but throughout the organization, that it's important for many fronts. And how do we incentivize that? So
yep.
Our employee groups are looking at that. Additionally, Broomfield has really exceptional benefits.
Yes, you do.
So being mindful of the accumulation, and we identify, I mean, we can clearly see who repeatedly doesn't use their time. So we can have kind of a target audience to say, what is it that's happening in those teams that would preclude them?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's a systemic conversation, and one that that we've started.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So I intend to support this, obviously, and so thank you very much.
Councilmember Law Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say that I support this wholeheartedly. Sometimes as we move towards what hopefully, God willing, will be the end of this pandemic time and whatnot, I think back to, a year ago when we started into this, we didn't know the end of the story. We didn't know how things were going to play out. We didn't know who was going to get infected and how much or how long it would take to get to a vaccine. And even in the midst of all that uncertainty, we had so many terrific employees continue to show up. Some of them, I'm sure, were scared and anxious and worried and uncertain, and everything changed. But I'm so proud of the way everyone, this sounds like a cliche, but I mean it truly from the depths of my heart, how proud I am that everyone overcame their own fears and anxieties because they realized that city business has to go on. We have to continue to serve our citizens because otherwise our citizens get more anxious, and without services and whatnot, their lives begin to fall apart even more than they already were. So I am absolutely in support of going back, especially with those frontline employees, and giving them a great big old hug. Well, we can't do that, but you know what I mean. At some point, we will be able to give them all a great big old hug and just say, thank you so much for stepping up, even in the midst of all that uncertainty and all that. We still don't know the end of the story, but we know a lot more about it now. So I support this wholeheartedly, and I really appreciate staff bringing it forward for us. Thank you.
Councilmember Tessier.
I could just say ditto Tessier on what Councilmember Law Evans and Councilmember Groom just shared. Like the skeleton crew that you use to keep the city and county running, to the impact and the efficacy of this team is quite extraordinary. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart, all of the staff who stayed and worked and put in those hours. And I think without you, we wouldn't be where we are today. And as Liz said, it is, I'm really proud. Once again, this is like incredible work. So I also intend to support it. And I'm so glad you brought it forth, Councilmember Groom. Yay.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Without belaboring the point, I too am very supportive, and I agree with my fellow council members. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just make a comment that not only is it mental health for employees to take vacation, but I learned a long time ago in public accounting that for internal control purposes is a good idea for people to take off a week or two every year. Not just mental health, but every job should have somebody who can cover for it. And so I would encouraging ways that you can. Maybe you can't make it mandatory to take vacation, but people should take vacation for a whole bunch of reasons. So anyway, I certainly, those are my thoughts. So let's go ahead and go to the Broomfield Housing Authority's consideration of proposed resolution number 2021-95-HA. Will the clerk please read proposed resolution number 2021-95-HA by title?
Resolution number 2021-95-HA, adopting a second amendment to the Broomfield Housing Authority budget for the year 2021.
Board Member Castriota.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that resolution number 2021-95-HA be adopted by the Housing Authority.
Board Member Schaaf.
Second.
I had two other hands up. Was that for seconds or was there comments that wanted to be made? Okay, so is there any discussion by the Housing Authority? Will the clerk please call the roll for the Housing Authority?
Castriota.
Yes.
Groom.
Yes.
Hinkle.
Yes.
Jezierski.
Yes.
Law Evans.
With many thanks and great joy, yes.
Lynn.
Yes.
Lindstedt.
Yes.
Schaaf.
Yes.
Tessier.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
It passes unanimously. Will the clerk please read proposed resolution number 2021-94 by title? And this is council. Yeah.
Resolution number 2021-94, adopting the Fourth Amendment to the City and County Broomfield budget for the year 2021.
Councilmember Groom.
Yes, thank you. I move that resolution number 2021-94 be adopted.
Is there a second? Councilmember Henkel.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll for City Council?
Broom,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Jezerski,
Yes.
Law Evans,
Yes, absolutely.
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Schaff,
Yes.
Tessier,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Castriata.
Yes.
It passes unanimously. Seeing there's no further business before the Broomfield Housing Authority, the Housing Authority meeting is adjourned. Our first item under council business this evening is the public hearing and council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2121, authorizing the amended vesting agreement for North Park in the second and final reading. I will declare the public hearing open. We will follow our standard public hearing procedures. First, staff will present a summary of the proposal. Next, we will have the applicant's presentation, if applicable. Then we will ask for public comments and final comments from the applicant. And finally, questions from city council members. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which staff will summarize.
Thank you again, Mayor and council members, for that last package. I'm already getting a whole host of texts and emails in tremendous gratitude. So again, thank you. The next item up will be presented by John Hall and Carl Front. We will start with the Director of Economic Vitality, John Hall, and Carl will help field any of those questions. John?
Thank you, City Manager Hoffman. Actually, Anna Bertanzetti is prepared to make this presentation. I believe Anna is on this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Thank you, City Manager Hoffman. Mayor, City Council, Anna Bertanzetti, Planning Director. If we could have the next slide, please. McWhinney CCOB Land Investments LLC is the owner and developer of the property that we call the North Park property, and sometimes we refer to it as the Baseline Community. McWhinney is requesting approval of an amended and restated vesting agreement and for the Managed Growth and Development Agreement, or we'll call it the MGDA, and the North Park PUD Plan, Planned Unit Development Plan. The property is generally located south of Colorado 7 and it's west of I-25 as shown on the map. Recently on April 13th of this year, City Council and the Urban Renewal Authority collectively approved 6 different agreements concerning the North Park subdivision. These agreements included the amended MGDA, 5 property tax increment revenue agreements with the applicable taxing districts. And Council also approved Ordinance 2121 on first reading regarding the proposed amended and restated vesting agreement. Next slide, please. Currently, the developer has vested property rights until 2037, subject to completion of some certain development deliverables. And the proposed vesting agreement would be extended, would extend those vesting rights with 2 potential 6-year extensions to 2049. The 2 additional 6-year terms are also conditioned upon completion of some certain development deliverables. Specifically, these include an initial 6-year extension to 2043 if, as of May 23rd, 2037, construction of at least 1.72 million square feet of commercial development is completed. And then an additional 6-year extension of the vesting term to April 14th of 2049 if at least 2.58 million square feet of commercial development is completed. And commercial development can include residential in vertical mixed-use buildings, and this is included in order to encourage dense mixed-use development, which is consistent with the vision and the zoning for the property. Extending the vested property rights provides the landowner with reasonable certainty, stability, and fairness in the land use planning process beyond the typical 3-year term, especially when we have significant public improvement investments, as with the Baseline project. This predictability helps to stimulate investment, development, and cooperation between the public and private sectors. The proposal has been noticed for the public hearing in accordance with all applicable requirements, and this concludes our presentation. The applicant is also here this evening.
Okay, so next is a presentation by the applicant. Just as we encourage staff to keep their presentation brief, I ask the applicant to be concise as well. Will the applicant's representative please identify themselves for the record prior to beginning their brief presentation this evening?
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. This is Kyle Harris. I'm the General Manager of McWhinney's Baseline Project, and we will definitely keep this brief. We only have 2 slides of any consequence. If we could go to the first one, that would be great. All right, so we had shown this slide to council last time when we were going through the MGDA, so I'm not going to repeat what we had said there. Rather, I wanted to make 2 points with the baseline development. The first is that this overall master plan includes an additional 175 acres that we acquired after the prior vesting agreement was executed. So we actually have more land to develop. So that's the first point. The second point is you'll see a number of the blue areas that I represented last time are in some stage of development. What's interesting, with the possible exception of the last mile distribution center, which we believe is going to occur within this next year, be completed, these other developments, these other areas are multiple year developments. And in the case of our Center Street district in the upper left, and then the creative corridor right on 160th, given that these are going to be multi-phased developments, those in and of themselves are likely to be longer than 2 decades to complete. And that doesn't even bring in the other areas that you see in white, which represent future development. So the point is, we have a very long development runway at Baseline. Next slide, please. And so the point we really wanted to make here is vesting is very important to us. Real estate developments, the costs are extremely front-loaded, and perhaps even more so at Baseline, given the very long-term nature of this development, which will be measured in decades rather than years. We as a developer are taking significant upfront financial risk with the development of this size and duration. And vesting is extremely important to us because it really does provide for us a common understanding of the expectations for both the developer and the city over the long term as we continue to build out Baseline. And next slide, and I think that concludes applicant's presentation.
That was brief, thank you.
Certainly.
We will now proceed with public comments. If there's anyone who would like to be heard, please press *3. State your first and last name and neighborhood for the record. I'm not noting anybody in the queue for 11A, so we'll move on to questions from council members. Members should limit themselves to questions during this portion. The time to introduce amendments, state positions for or against this item is later. Are there any council member questions or questions? Noting none, I will close the public hearing. Next is council consideration of proposed ordinance number 2121. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2121 by title?
Ordinance number 2121, authorizing and approving the amended and restated vesting agreement, -21 for North Park PUD and certain sections of the North Park Development Agreement, -2021, as specific development plans with extended vested property rights pursuant to 24-68-1042 CRS and Chapter 16-40 BMC. Second and final reading.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that ordinance number 2121 be adopted on second and final reading and ordered published by title.
Councilmember Schaaf.
Second.
Is there any discussion by council? Councilmember Grom, had your hand for this there? Is there any discussion by council member? I will go ahead and move the clerk. Call the roll.
Hinkle.
Yes.
Jezierski.
Yes.
Law Evans.
Yes.
Lim.
Yes.
Lindstedt. Lindstedt.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Bath,
Yes.
Tessier,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Castriata,
Yes.
Groom.
Yes.
It passed unanimously. So that means that we've done everything we need to do at this point in time with baseline project. Is that correct, City Manager? John? Okay. So Kyle and Chad and others, good luck. We'll be watching you.
I know you will. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it.
No, everybody's looking forward to it, to say the least. So thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Our next item under council business this evening is the public hearing and council's consideration of proposed resolution number 2021-57, approving the PUD site development plan and improvement agreement for the lock at Flatirons. I will declare the public hearing open. We will follow the city standard public hearing procedures as previously outlined. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which staff will summarize.
Thanks again, Mayor. Anna Burton-Zetti. Part 2. Anna.
Thank you. Good evening again, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem City Council, Anna Burton-Zetti, Planning Director. Next slide, please. The applicant Pivot Development Company LLC is requesting an amendment to the Mid-Cities Planned Unit Development Plan and a site development plan that captures an apartment building with a parking garage. The PUD amendment will permit an increase in the total number of residential units and will establish a standalone multifamily use for the proposed site. The site development plan is for a 5-story, 254-unit apartment complex with a 6-level parking garage and associated amenities. Next slide, please. The property is located at 460 Flatiron Boulevard at the southwest intersection of Interlock and Loop and Flatiron Boulevard. Next slide, please. The land use designation for this site is mixed use commercial, and the proposed multifamily residential use, when taken into consideration with the surrounding properties, is consistent with this mixed use commercial use. If we could have the video, we have a video prepared for you this evening. So the site video will begin at the northeast corner of the site, just on the south side of Flatiron Boulevard, and will be facing west. So you can see the existing Town Place suites that are adjacent to the site to the west, and we'll pan south across the site. You can see the Camden Interlochen Apartments just immediately to the south of the proposed project. Some of the existing landscaping adjacent to Interlock and Loop. This landscaping remains largely unchanged with this project. As we pan a little bit to the north, we'll see the Vega headquarters and training facility. Just on the other side of Flatiron, there is an undeveloped parcel, and then you can see the Renaissance Hotel there just immediately across the street. And then we will pan back to the point of beginning looking west. Thank you for the video. And then we'll go back.
Okay.
We'll go back to the slide presentation. The proposed amendment to the PUD affects specifically one tract, is tract 4, which is Mid-Cities filing number 1, lot 2. It will establish, as I mentioned, the multifamily use for this property versus the transit-oriented development, which allowed a mix of uses for this property. The amendment also increases the maximum dwelling units per acre from 50 as the dwelling units per acre to 85 dwelling units per acre. It increases the total number of residential units to 270 because currently there are only 2 remaining units allotted to the Mid-Cities development. And it reduces the minimum open area requirement from 40% to 25%, which is generally consistent with what we have seen in terms of reductions with other higher density projects. Next slide, please. As shown in the plan view renderings, the 5-story Class A 254 unit complex wraps around the 6-level parking garage. There are 419 parking spaces, including 140 bicycle parking spaces. There's 24 spaces on levels 1 through 5 and 20 spaces in the bike storage area. The amenities for the parking garage or for the facility include a sky lounge, fitness center, club room, pool courtyard, and a dog park. The buildings are oriented to try and maximize the frontage along Flatiron Boulevard to create a more urban feel. The amenity space, leasing area, and fitness areas are all located with the primary access to the north elevation. Next slide, please. There are variances requested as part of this proposal. There is a reduction in the street setback along Interlochen Loop from 75 to 35 feet. Traffic engineering has reviewed the setback reduction and noted that it is acceptable and will not impede any potential widening of Interlochen Loop in the future. An encroachment of 4.2 feet is proposed for a cantilevered roof into the 20-foot setback along the northern portion of the lot. This was reviewed and accepted by the Architectural Control Committee for the Mid-Cities area. And there is also a modification to the standard parking stalls from Broomfield Code within the garage. So this would allow some reductions that, again, are generally consistent with what we have seen in structured parking within Broomfield. There's also a reduction in the width of the drive aisle within that same parking structure. Next slide, please. There are 2 access points proposed off of Flatiron Boulevard. There is a right in, right out from the parking garage. It's about halfway through the apartment complex, and a second full access movement that is shared with the Town Place Suites to the west. There's no right-of-way improvements required as part of this development. It's all existing. The 6-level garage will house 419 spaces. This includes 22 standard electric vehicle charging spaces, and there are, as I mentioned, 140 bikes parking spaces. This next slide shows the view of the building from the southwest corner of Interlochen Loop and Flatiron Boulevard. The building colors and materials include stone and stucco, and the garage is partially screened with the apartments at the south elevation. The parking garage also houses a dog wash station and bike storage. Next slide, please. And then this is the view from Flatiron Boulevard at the northwest corner. Next slide, please. This project includes a sign at the corner entrance of Interlochen Loop and Flatiron Boulevard, and the applicant is providing cash in lieu for the public land dedication requirement. The 254 unit complex is expected to generate just under 500 people at build out, and the Open Space and Trails staff and the Open Space and Trails Committee have agreed with this method of cash in lieu due to the relatively small size of the site versus the public land dedication requirement. The applicant is also providing a cash in lieu payment for the inclusionary housing ordinance. This is consistent with the ordinance and has been reviewed and approved by the Housing Advisory Committee. Both of these are included in the proposed subdivision improvement agreement. Next slide, please. The Planning and Zoning Commission considered the proposal on February 22nd of this year. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval subject to 2 conditions. Those were, 1, that the south elevation of the parking garage not be an unfinished color, and the applicant worked with the architectural control to find a gray paint color that was acceptable to the architectural control and is included in the application this evening. And then there were concerns expressed from the commission regarding the drainage from the balconies with respect to snow removal, and wanted the applicant to address those concerns. The applicant's architect completed analysis of the drainage from the balconies and indicated that they couldn't find an example of an apartment complex that required drainage from the balconies or snow removal. But the letter determined that this is not a part of the building code requirements, and the balconies do not extend over public sidewalks or other balconies with the complex. So concluded that the concerns about public safety have been addressed through their additional analysis. Next slide, please. Staff did identify some key issues with the proposal. The first is that the PUD amendment is requested because this is a standalone residential use and increases the number of residential units within the Mid-Cities development. However, it remains consistent with the comprehensive plan land use designation of mixed use commercial, since there's less than 30% of the area within Mid-Cities designated for residential use. The PUD amendment also would reduce the open area requirements. And these are, but as I mentioned, that is consistent with what we have seen in higher density projects within Flatiron Marketplace and the Arista area. There are also variances requested, which I summarized previously, with setbacks and parking stall and drive aisle widths. This concludes staff's presentation, and the applicant is also here this evening and has a presentation for you as well.
Okay, so let's go to the presentation by the applicant. Just as we encourage staff to keep their presentations brief, please keep your concise presentation as well. Will the applicant's representative please identify themselves for the record prior to beginning their brief presentation this evening? You're on mute. Matt, you're on mute. Matt?
Sorry about that, Mr. Mayor. This is Matt here from Pivot Development Company. Joining us on the call of our team is Evan Boderoff and Daniel Kennington with Dwell Design Studio, as well as Kanan Revich and Chris Helper from Kimley Horn. Next slide. Anna covered much of our presentation, but first and foremost, I'd like to mention what many of the council members mentioned on number 10. The city, whether it was planning, zoning, other individuals with engineering, even the city attorneys during this last 12 months of pandemic have been fantastic to work with. It's obviously been a very challenging time for anyone in the United States, as well as in Broomfield. And the individuals with the city of Broomfield have been fantastic to work with on this project, as difficult as times may be. And I really appreciate it, because it can't be said for all municipalities across the country. This one I can. A couple of just brief notes. Obviously, Anna touched on that we are more than happy to make those contributions, for the cash and lieu for public land dedication, as well as the housing authority. A couple of quick points I will want to make is, when we went and looked through this project, one of the things as we looked at was our co-working space. We actually had our team kind of talk to many of the employers within Broomfield about what employees are really looking for, because some are working from home all the time, half the time. They might have to make a decision to work from home 50-50. So we really worked in our co-working space within our amenities area to really give residents an opportunity to have a place that they could work and feel like they're not at home, but they didn't have to go to work. As well as we wanted to make sure that all of our features for our community was all very high-end luxury, but at the same time felt like home, kind of the feeling of live, work, play, and yet feel like the comfort of being at your own house within your own community. Most of the other items Anna did discuss. I am going to turn it to Daniel Kennington with Dwell to just talk a little bit more of the architectural design. So the city council members, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, you have an idea from that. Danielle?
Thanks, Matt. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yep. Okay, great. I'm Danielle Kennington. I work with Dwell Design Studio. I've had the privilege of working on this project and being the architect for this deal for quite a while now, and it's been kind of amazing to watch this project come to birth. If you could go to slide 5, we'll skip over some of the stuff that Anna already covered for us. So this is kind of looking at our main facade entrance as you kind of view from Interlock and Loop. For the architecture style on this one, we went with a contemporary mountain aesthetic. We were pulling from the local vernacular, using natural stone elements and kind of using contrasting stones and wood to saturate that primary facade that abuts that pedestrian path along the Flatiron to the north of the project. We're also kind of sprinkling in some cedar accents in the canopies and awnings to gesture towards that public walkway. And on the northwest or the northeast corner that you see there, we've created this urban plaza design focusing on connectivity to the outdoor lifestyle. The site is situated, it's connected to a lot of biking and hiking trails and things like that. So we really wanted to put a focus on how do we kind of connect that urban plaza to the site, and how do we create a vibe that is very outdoor adventure. And as we kind of delaminate from the building into the site, we're using natural vegetation native to the area to create little benches and seating areas in the little pockets with the planters and things like that. If you go to the next slide, please. All right, and here you can see our elevations. We've used the materials to kind of break up the facade of the building to kind of make the massing seem a little bit more scaled down so that it didn't feel quite as heavy on the street edge. So we've got kind of a balance between dark stones, light stones, wood materials. We've got stucco on the elevations. And then when we go to the side, the back sides of the materials, kind of we filter in more of the economical with fiber cement siding and, you know, just dealing with painting on the back side of the garage. That you see there in that middle elevation. It was mentioned from Anna in the previous presentation. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is the kind of reiteration of the plan you guys already saw that talks about, we've kind of shaped the building to kind of create a cusp, to create more opportunities for views to the mountains to the west, while still creating kind of a frontage along the north, which is a little bit more of an urban feel. To create a kind of a connectivity towards that pedestrian path that we've got to the north there. And next slide, please. This is a view of our courtyard. I think the materiality and the imagery here is really what we want to look at. We've kind of created a lot of elements with the natural stone and natural woods, and those things are filtered, the vibe and the flavor of those elements are filtered into the front of the facade as well. So a lot of these benches and concrete elements and things like that are going to be experienced for the pedestrians on the northeast corner of the building as well. That pretty much concludes my portion of the presentation. I didn't know, Matt, if you had anything
Thank
else.
you, Anna. Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate it. And that actually concludes our presentation. Anna did a very good job presenting our project to all of you. So we appreciate it and look forward to any questions you may have.
Okay, so we'll proceed with public comments. If there's anyone who would like to be heard, please press *3. State your first and last name and neighborhood for the record. I'm not noting anyone for this item, so we'll go to questions from city council members or next. Members should limit themselves to questions during this portion. The time to introduce amendments and state positions for or against this item is later. Are there any questions from city council? Councilmember Tessier.
Thank you. I just have one question, and I appreciated the presentation. What's your timeline for getting this started to finish?
We anticipate starting construction in the middle of June or July of this year, and it takes approximately 24 to 26 months to complete this project. It is one building, but it can be, as we've discussed with North Metro Fire, the east side of the building and the north side of the building where all our amenities are, our leasing center, that will be the first part of the units that will be delivered east and north of the garage. But as it's one continuous building, it's never going to stop. We're just going to continually build, but it's that portion that will be the first phase of the units coming online. So it's 24 to 26 months, and we anticipate starting hopefully in less than 2 months.
Great, thank you. And then I had one question for staff. When developers come in and do the cash in lieu, can you explain to them can you explain to the public and the rest of us what those cash in lieus, when they can be expected to be delivered?
In the case of, sorry, thank you, Councilmember Tessier. With each project as it comes through, the subdivision improvement agreement will specify the timing for the cash contributions. Sometimes it's prior to recordation of the plat, but it's often at least prior to the issuance of the first permit. For very large subdivisions with individual homes, they're usually phased as the homes are completed. But with apartment projects, as Mr. Hare was mentioning, it's all kind of one complete permit package. It's prior to those, the beginning of construction.
Awesome, thank you. That's all I have.
Councilmember Lamb.
I had a sustainability question. I appreciate that the applicant is going to put the EV charging stations on each level of the garage, and there will be a lot of bicycle parking. That's a great asset to that development. In the concept review in July, the memo had a note that the applicant was considering solar panels on the garage roof. Is that still a possibility, or was there a reason the applicant decided not to do that?
Thank you for your question. We still have it as a possibility, but there are a couple of factors that are in play. Obviously, as everyone may or may have not have seen, many costs in construction have gone up, and this project takes 26 months. And the last part of this project, if we did solar, would be when the entire building is done. One of the things we looked at was the sustainability of building solar on the roof is really beneficial to the operations of the property, meaning to the ownership. So one thing we did look at is, and it is mentioned in our presentation, we have decided to make every single one of our apartments a smart apartment to give the residents the ability to manage their utilities themselves. I can't tell you how many times you can see that lights are on or they forgot to turn something off. They have the opportunity to use their cell phone if they're traveling or what have you to turn off their lights. So yes, we still are considering solar. We also have to consider some of the realities that are in our real estate market right now, which are escalating costs. So we're not taking it off the table, but it's definitely something we're going to have to consider as we look at what our costs are going to be down the road.
Okay, thank you for that honest answer. The other question has to do with the fact, this is kind of the staff and the applicant, the fact that it's in the airport influence area. So there's a note in the memo that says that the applicant will inform, or the developer will inform the apartment applicant at the time of their application that they are in the airport influence area. I guess I would ask staff, is this, do we have a standard way that staff usually suggests that the applicant inform the apartment applicant? Is this something we've done before, or does the applicant have in mind how they're going to do this?
Councilmember Lim, we do not have a standard form for that notification. If an applicant wanted to work with us to collaborate on a form, we'd be happy to do that, though. I'm not sure if Mr. Hare or one of the others on the line wanted to talk about if they have considered that step in the process, how that would occur.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Our management firm is actually a management firm that operates and manages a property right down the street from this. It will be first off mentioned to any resident when they do a tour of the property. It will also be noted in their lease. So it will be noted in multiple places. First, when they walk through the apartment community, but if they decide to sign a lease in our community, there will be notification in that lease of that.
Okay, great. That addresses the question. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the question.
Councilmember Jazierski.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. And in general, I have no problems with the project. Typically, I don't like to be picky, but here I'm very sensitive to parking garages and small spaces in parking garages. So can you tell me a little bit more about the reductions that you're doing to the spaces in the garages? And is it going to be enough room for some of the larger trucks that you see people driving?
Sure.
Yeah,
Danielle, why don't you take that one?
Yeah. So our standard parking stalls in the parking garage are going to be 18 feet deep instead of 19. We still are providing on the north end of the parking garage and on the south end of the parking garage, we are providing the 19-foot stalls. It's just going to be the stalls that run down the center that are going to be slightly shorter. So they'll be 18 feet instead of 19. But we're not really utilizing compact spaces very much. We have, I think, 10 compact spaces in the garage. So this is our way of kind of, just because the compact spaces for the Broomfield standard are quite short, I think they're 15 feet deep, which doesn't really fit even a standard size sedan. So we thought that this would be a better option to suit most vehicles. We do understand that Broomfield does have larger SUVs and trucks, and we are accommodating those on the north and south end of the garage. I think we have 75 parking spaces that meet the Broomfield standard at 19 out of the 419 spaces.
And then to go along with that, you said also the drive areas are going to be narrower as well, though?
Yes, so the drive aisles will be 24 feet, 5 1/4 inches instead of 25 feet. So we're about 6 inches shy on either end of the drive aisle. We are at 25 on the top and bottom ends. It's just the 2 drive aisles coming up in the top.
Okay, so you're pretty confident that someone that does have a large truck or SUV we'll be able to park safely in the garage. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Groom.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I really appreciate the design and the architect. I really like it. I think it's a unique product for Broomfield. I think you really hit the design of the area. And it's right off of a main street. So I think it will really look very nice on that main street up there. So kudos to your design company for that, and the rest of everyone else that's put so much time, I'm sure, into it. One question about the affordable housing, what's kind of the decision in regards to providing the units versus the cash in lieu? Because the cash in lieu, although will help us on a different project, but the units is really, especially in that area, very, very valuable to us. That would be an amazing area to have some units in. Could you talk to us a little bit about that decision and how that was weighed out in your project?
Sure. Thank you for the question. When we evaluated this project, just like we do any project, we obviously take into account many different metrics within a 3-mile radius, whether that's income, population, job growth, walkability. And when we looked at this project and realized that it's only a 3.3 acre site, and the ability for our matrix as our business to be able to build apartment communities that are above 250 units, the only way we can do that is by a parking garage. And a parking garage is substantially expensive, but at the same time, a parking garage creates security for residents. It also creates that we are interlocking in the technology park, and we felt like it was more advantageous for this location, the walkability of this site, to build a community that was more of a luxury community. I had spent time talking with Cheryl at the HAC regarding this. I had multiple discussions regarding it, and we made a business decision that we felt that our community would be more successful if we were a market rate apartment community, but yet sensitive to the fact that the Housing Authority did pass the ordinance in March of last year. And after we made that decision, we as a team and as a company decided we would prefer to operate our building on that route and give the cash in lieu, then go the other direction, which might be the rents could be less, but the cost to build the property on this size site is not going to change because of building a garage first and foremost and how tight the site is. So that's really what weighed our decision and why we decided to go that route. We felt that it was best for a pivot, and we also felt like it also achieved some of the goals that the city might have with the cash in lieu and the HAC.
Perfect, thank you. I really appreciate that insight.
Councilmember
That's all I
Hinkle.
had, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this question is for staff. I sort of had the same concerns that Councilmember Jazierski had about parking. And I remember some other projects that we've had in the past where we were given sort of an average amount of parking spaces per unit that was being developed, and I'm just not seeing it, and I could have missed it. I wanted to just know, how many parking spaces per unit does this establish? And is this parking specifically for this project? Is that correct, right?
Councilmember Hinkle, yes, I think we provide those parking spaces per bedroom when we're talking about the Arista development. We often provide a comparison there because the Arista PUD does not have to follow our standard parking requirements. So we provide that comparison. We didn't provide it in this case. We did a comparison against the standard code requirements. We do believe that this parking meets the intended use. It's consistent with other projects in the area, and that the parking aisle widths and depths are appropriate given that this is a parking structure. The 25-foot widths is really for our emergency vehicle response turning radius. So this meets the requirement with just the 6-inch small, a little bit narrower spot on the drive aisles, and the applicant is providing some of the standard depths within the parking lot. And let me know if I didn't answer any other part of that question. I'd be happy to elaborate.
Yeah, no, that's good. It helps for me for consistency as I hear those numbers for parking. Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further comments, I will close the public hearing. Next is council's consideration, proposed resolution number 2021-57. Will the clerk please read proposed resolution number 2020-57 by title?
Resolution number 2021-57, approving Mid-Cities filing number 1, Lot 2, the Lockett Flatirons, PUD plan amendment, site development plan, improvement agreement, and reimbursement agreement.
Councilmember Tessier.
Thank you. I move that resolution 2021-57 be adopted.
Councilmember Henkel.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Jezierski,
Yes.
Law Evans,
Yes.
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Schaff,
Yes.
Tessier,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Castriota,
Yes.
Groom,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
So it passes unanimously. Congratulations, Matt, to you and your team, and we look forward to see it constructed beginning in June or July. So
Thank you guys. I appreciate all of you, and hope you all stay safe. And hopefully sometime in the near future, we can all see each other face to face instead of on Zoom.
June 8th, I'm told.
Sounds like a good idea. Thank you all. Very much appreciated.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take our 10-minute break right now because 11C's got a little bit of a meat on it, and so let's go ahead and take a break. I'll go ahead and say we'll reconvene at 8:07. 8:07. So thank you, everybody.
The Access Live event is in music hold.
So Kathy, when it hits 8:07, go ahead and take the music hold off.
Music hold ended.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to reconvene City Council after our break, and we're going to start with Council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2144, repealing and reenacting Chapter 17-54 of the Broomfield Municipal Code regarding oil and gas land use regulations. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which staff will summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tammy Yelko, Nancy Rogers, and Anna Bertanzetti will walk us through this item. I believe, forgive me, I'm remote tonight, which is my first council meeting remote. Tammy, will you kick us off on this item, please?
Sure, happy to. Special Counsel for Oil and Gas, Elizabeth Paranhos, is going to walk us through our final draft of the oil and gas regulations on first reading. Elizabeth?
Thank you so much, Tammy. Good evening, Council, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm very pleased to be here with you all this evening to present the first reading of our oil and gas ordinance, which, as most of you know, we have been working on for quite some time now. And it's very exciting that we're finally at this stage. So for tonight, I was just going to go over some of the key provisions that have been revised since the last time that this ordinance was before City Council at the study session on February 16th. If someone could move to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So in terms of substantive revisions to the February 16th study session draft, we made sure that throughout the regulations, all of the provisions meet the stated purpose of the regulations, which is to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare, and also to safeguard the environment and wildlife resources. In addition, we made sure that the regulations implement the authority of local governments to regulate the surface impacts of oil and gas operations in a reasonable manner in order to address land use, nuisances, environmental quality such as air quality and water quality, safety, and other matters, including financial assurances that the General Assembly recently authorized local governments to regulate. And in addition, the General Assembly limited local government's authority in the sense that any regulations that are promulgated in order to avoid adverse impacts must be necessary and reasonable. Next slide, please. So the first change that I just wanted to highlight is an update to one of the whereas clauses, and this was in response to some City Council input. We updated one of the whereas clauses to reflect the fact that City and County of Broomfield has received complaints from citizens of health and welfare impacts during the production phase at the Livingston well site. Next slide, please. One of the other changes that we made is to just revise the definition of incident, and this is really to make sure that the definition is in fact reasonable. So throughout the regulations, there's a number of substantive provisions that are triggered whenever there's an incident at an oil and gas facility. We previously had a definition of incident that could include something like just a cut that would require a Band-Aid, for example. And so we wanted to make sure that in any instance where there are substantive provisions or substantive requirements that are imposed on the operator, that those requirements are reasonable. And so, for example, in the operator's safety management plan, the operator's plan, which is an internal document, has to include written procedures that require the operator to investigate all incidents and make a list of all incidents
that have occurred within the last 10 years at any of the operator's facilities. So we did not want to have a list of things that, for example, just required a Band-Aid, but rather we revised the definition of incident to be just those that require medical treatment. We think this is a robust definition that will still give the city plenty of information regarding an operator's safety, history and record, and also the procedures that an operator has taken in response to incidents that actually do require medical treatment without being so broad as to essentially be useless. Next slide, please. Previously in the regulations for flow lines and pipelines, there had been a requirement that the operator provide advance notice to the city and receive city approval prior to abandoning any flow lines and pipelines. We wanted to make sure that it was clear to the operators that flow lines included both on-location flow lines, those are the flow lines that are actually at a oil and gas location, as well as those that leave the well site or the location, so-called off-location flow lines. So this was more of a clarifying change, but the current regulation does require that the operators have to provide pre-abandonment notice to the city and also obtain the city's approval prior to abandoning all flow lines, whether that's abandoning them in place or removing the flow lines, which is and pipelines, which is the city's preference. Next slide, please. In terms of how the regulations work. So for the most part, the regulations work anytime an operator comes to the city and county of Broomfield and they want to install a new oil and gas facility. So they have to obtain a use by special review permit in order to do that. There are, however, instances where operators of existing facilities that are not subject to an operator agreement, such as the one between Extraction and the city, where if an operator undertakes some kind of significant change at that existing facility, they may also need to apply for a new permit and bring that old facility up to compliance with all of the requirements in this Chapter 1754. And so we modified the language in Part 40 or 040 to basically make it clear that any substantial modification of an existing facility may trigger the requirement of the operator to apply for a new permit and bring that existing facility into compliance with all of the rules and regulations in this ordinance. Next slide, please. At the last study session in February, there was unanimous direction from council that the health emergency preparedness and public participation notice, which the city has been preparing in terms of the contents and a template, or near unanimous, I should say, there was a majority approval for that notice to be sent out to all owners and tenants that reside within 0.8 miles of the location of a proposed oil and gas facility. So pursuant to that direction, we revised the notice requirements, and those apply both when an operator comes into the city for a pre-application notice and also after the pre-application when they actually notice the application itself. Next slide, please. So in the February 16th study session, there was some discussion of whether or not the city should apply certain requirements, including post-plugged and abandoned inspection requirements to plugged and abandoned wells, and also whether or not the city should retain a surety such as a bond that the operator posts to ensure compliance with all of the rules and regulations of the ordinance. Since February 16th, the state has undertaken some steps that are leading up to a rulemaking where the state will actually consider updating its financial assurance requirements, including its bonding requirements for plugged and abandoned wells, and also other financial assurance requirements. Because that state rulemaking is imminent, it should occur sometime this summer, and it will absolutely involve financial insurance requirements for plugged and abandoned wells. And because orphan wells is one of the key issues that rulemaking will address, we think the best course at this point for the city is to wait to do anything else or to include any additional requirements for plugged and abandoned wells in this particular ordinance until after the state has acted. It's possible that the state rulemaking will actually address the bonding issue and may in fact require some kind of financial assurance that could be that would be in place post plugging and abandonment. And most likely there will also be information that is surfaced during the stakeholder discussions and during the rulemaking that will shed some light on just how long after a well is plugged and abandoned it may leak and what steps operators can take during the lifetime of that well to actually prevent leaks. And all of that information is really quite central to and important to any kind of requirements related to inspecting plugged and abandoned wells and also related to holding financial assurances for some time after an operator has plugged and abandoned wells. So at this point, staff's recommendation is rather than adding any requirements related to inspections of plugged and abandoned wells or financial assurances that the city could hold post plugging and abandonment, we think the prudent decision at this point is to just wait and see what happens at that state financial assurance rulemaking that should occur sometime this summer. Next slide. That may be it. One more. So also at the February 16 study session, there was some discussion as to whether or not the city should have its own seismic testing permit. The COGCC in the mission change rulemaking that finalized in January did include a seismic testing permit. There were some questions about exactly what the contents of that permit are, and also whether or not, if the city did not adopt its own seismic testing permit, if the city would still be notified of any seismic testing activities that occurred in Broomfield. And so just to respond to those questions, local governments do receive notice of an approved permit and also of the operator's intent to begin testing. So there will be an opportunity in the event that any seismic testing activities were to occur in Broomfield, the city would obtain notice of those activities prior to the date that they began. Also, it's important to point out that seismic testing activities occur during the exploration phase. That is, pre-production. That's when the operator is still trying to determine if there are any resources that can be developed, and if so, what the boundaries of known fields and pools are within a certain jurisdiction. At this point, given the development that's already occurred in Broomfield, it's, I think, quite unlikely that there would be any exploratory development activities such as seismic testings that would actually occur in the city. And so there's not a huge upside, in my opinion, in terms of the city to have its own seismic testing permit process. To do so would actually require the city to hire an expert to help develop that permit and potentially to implement it, as well as seismic testing permit requirements are quite technical and differ from those requirements that are in, for example, this current ordinance. And so it would be a relatively heavy lift and resource intensive for the city to undertake developing its own seismic testing permit. Next slide. I believe that is the last slide. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Okay, so that concludes staff's presentation.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
We'll go to public comments next. There are a couple of people in the queue for public comments, and I'll say to others that if you would like to be heard, now would be the time to press *3 to state your first and last name and neighborhood for the record. We will proceed with Frank. Frank, identify give us your full name and your neighborhood, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Frank Gallagher. I'm over in Broomfield Heights, and I'm a small business owner now for about 8 years, and previously an employee of that business for 7 years before I bought it. I'm an action sports photographer, and over the years, it's become extremely apparent that the world of action sports, as well as several other sports, are directly tied to the oil and gas industry. What I mean to say is that when the oil and gas industry does well, sports like rodeo, motocross, drag racing, rally racing, as well as youth and community league sports also thrive. I've seen it from 2008. Now, when oil booms, we do well. When oil falls, we all start to suffer. Due to this fact, the vast majority of those who participate in sports also work in some way, shape, or form related to oil and gas. This directly impacts my company and the industry. Photos of an event for what I do is like a candy bar in the checkout line. When there's no extra money, we don't get candy bars. And these contestants, they don't buy photos. And then I go hungry. This proposal is to keep the public safe from noise, air quality, water quality. However, it makes it almost impossible to obtain the almost half-mile setback that this proposal requires. I've lived next to these sites in the past, and the temporary walls that are now put up around new drill sites cut the noise down to a minimum compared to what it was without the walls. It also cuts as much of the light pollution at night down as humanly possible. These companies that you are mentioning here and that are going to want new permits, they've already have the vast majority of these regulations on the books, and this is nothing more than a glorified not in my backyard proposal. This proposal would also hinder home and landowners. Those home and landowners who own the mineral rights to their land would be so hamstrung and forced to jump through so many hoops to sell their mineral rights that it makes them next to worthless. Rights that these citizens bought and paid for, knowing that they would be able to make money off of them in the future, would now, by the stroke of the pen, be wiped out, and these citizens could lose thousands of dollars due to no fault of their own. The implementation of this proposal would not only hurt the oil and gas industry here in Colorado, but crippling an already struggling economic recovery. We have all struggled during this pandemic, and this is not the time for new regulations, but the time to back any and all businesses here in Broomfield and Colorado in general.
Frank, your time has expired. Thank you, Frank. Chris, you're next. Give us your full name and you're not a resident. Maybe give us your location.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
You have 3 minutes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Chris McGowan. I represent the American Petroleum Institute, Colorado. I'm in Denver, 80203. I just want to say good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Chris McGowan, and I am an associate director for API Colorado. API Colorado is a division of the American Petroleum Institute, which represents all facets of the natural gas and oil industry. Our 600 members produce, process, and distribute most of the nation's energy. In our first 100 years, API has developed more than 700 standards to enhance operational and environmental safety, efficiency, and sustainability. API Colorado is committed to ensuring a strong, viable industry capable of meeting the energy needs of the state in a safe and environmentally responsible manner. I would like to start by again thanking the council members for their time and allowing us the opportunity to speak. Tonight, I come before you to voice our concerns regarding your proposed oil and gas regulations. I would like to start by saying we appreciate the city's desire to update your regulations to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of your constituents. We share those goals. Nevertheless, we do have some significant outstanding concerns regarding your proposal. As we have noted in our written comments, we believe this proposal contains some provisions that are contrary to both the intent and language of Senate Bill 181. While we agree that under Colorado law, local governments do have more authority to regulate certain potential impacts from oil and gas development, we also believe it's quite clear that your authority is not limitless. Colorado's oil and gas operators have continued to work in good faith with the communities where they operate. Time and time again, industry and trade association representatives have worked with regulators to develop reasonable regulations that both protect public health, safety, and welfare, while at the same time allowing the industry to operate in a safe manner that protects private property rights. We would encourage the Broomfield City Council to sit down with us and discuss the community concerns surrounding development and work towards agreeable provisions in the local code. As always, we do appreciate the opportunity to comment before the council. Please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm not noting any other people in the queue. Mayor Pro Tem, I mean, I don't, okay, so it says 0 now. So we'll move on to questions from City Council. Members should limit themselves to questions during this portion. The time to introduce amendments to state positions for or against this item is later. Are there any questions? Next is council. There are no questions. You know, I guess I'd point out for the public that we've had a series of meetings over the last year and a half, intense meetings, and so and there's been a huge outreach to work with council members and members of the public to include them on this. So the fact that there are no questions tonight and we'll move on to amendments it represents the fact that there was a thorough effort. I just want to state that for the record. Next is council's consideration of proposed resolution number 2144. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2144 by title?
Hang on. Ordinance number 2144, repealing and reenacting chapter 17-54 of the Broomfield Municipal Code regarding oil and gas land use regulations.
You know, I don't see anybody make a motion, but I'm going to ask Councilmember Lim if she wants to make the motion.
I would like to propose an amendment.
Yeah, no, we're doing. We need to make the motion first. I didn't know if you wanted to. I just wanted to offer you the. Did you want to make the initial motion, and we'll go to amendments after that? Otherwise, I can go to the Mayor Pro Tem.
That's fine. Mayor Pro Tem can make the motion. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that ordinance number 2144 be adopted on first reading and ordered published in full, and that a public hearing be held virtually at 6 p.m. on May 11th, 2021, as allowed by City Council procedures and rules of order, and that second and final reading on ordinance number 2144 be scheduled for May 11th, 2021, following the public hearing.
Councilmember Anderson.
Second.
Okay, so is there any discussion? And now I'll call upon Councilmember Lim. Were you going to make the amendments?
I can start.
Or Nancy, were you going to? I mean, were you going to present? Because
is Attorney Rogers going to post the amendments on the screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, we have those ready to go, Councilmember Lim.
Okay, we'll go ahead and put them on the screen. I apologize. I'm throwing you off your.
You're fine.
Okay.
The first one that we have on the screen, Councilmember Lim, is the most current information in 1754-060. If that's the first one you want to start with.
Yes. So this amendment is to update the section which describes the map that's required in the review in the special review application. We have had some issues in the past where with previous operator applications where the map has not been kept current and they were missing some entire residences in the map. And so this information is important in relation to siting and setbacks in oil and gas development. So the amendment is to section 1754-60 in the introductory paragraph, and it adds the sentence, the content, and relevant information in any required submittal may be based on the most current must be based on the most current information available to the applicant as of the date of the submittal of the application. Do I need to read the entire section, or is it enough just to read that?
No, I think that's enough, and we'll consider that to be the motion for the amendment. And is there a second? And I can't. Councilmember Henkel.
Second.
Okay, so now we're going to have a discussion on this amendment and only this amendment. Is there any further discussion on this amendment being proposed by Councilmember Lim? I'll go ahead and have the clerk please call the roll.
Law Evans,
Yes.
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Schaaf,
Yes.
Tessier, Tessier,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Castriata,
Yes.
Groom,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Jezierski.
Yes.
Okay, the amendment passes unanimously. I guess, Nancy, would you put up the second slide? And then I'll call upon Councilmember Lim.
Okay, this is an amendment to section 175470, use by special review approval criteria. The siting of an oil and gas facility is subject to state and federal regulations regarding floodplains, as stated in the text of this section. This amendment clarifies that in the application to the city, that the operator has demonstrated that mitigation measures will ensure that all hazardous materials will be contained on the well site during flood conditions.
So you want to go ahead and read the amendment for the record? Just the red language.
Okay, and the red language is, and operator has demonstrated that mitigation measures will ensure all hazardous materials will be contained on the well site during flood conditions.
Okay, is there a second? Councilmember Anderson.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on this amendment for floodplain mitigation changes amendment? Raise your hand. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Schaaf,
Yes.
Tessier,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Castriata,
Yes.
Groom,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Jezierski,
Yes.
Law Evans.
Yes.
Nancy, whoever, would you please put up the third slide?
Yep.
It's on the page right now. Councilmember Lim, do you want to address this one as well?
That's fine. I just wanted to recognize that Councilmember Anderson and I drafted these together. So this is an amendment to section 175490, conditions of approval applicable to use by special review application. It's in recognition of the fact that our community had suffered extreme odor impacts when a current operator first used an oil-based drilling mud. Section DD addressed this actual problem. This amendment changes the wording of point 5 since category 4 is not clearly defined by the COGCC or other official source. Point 5 is reworded to designate the desired characteristic of the drilling mud as being synthetic based. The words in red in the amendment that are added are synthetic based oil to describe drilling mud.
Councilmember Anderson.
I'll second the amendment.
Okay, is there any discussion on the drilling mud amendment? Councilmember Castriata? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank my fellow council members, Anderson and Lim, for their hard work on this and for really diving in to find that ambiguous language that we know has been exploited in the past. And it just gives me great comfort knowing that your eyes are on these documents and that they're going to be as tight as they can be. So thank you both, Councilmember Anderson and Councilmember Lim, for your hard work on this.
Okay, Councilmember Groom.
Yes, I second that. Appreciation to our fellow council members that have the eye on the details. A question in regards to the category 4 versus the synthetic oil based or synthetic based oil. I am worried about not having industry input on this wording and how this may or may not affect. Do we have any input from the industry on would the word synthetic have any impact to what they're using currently? I mean, I know they're not drilling, but they switched when they were drilling and we were having the odor issue. Would they still be able to use what they switched to with this wording? They would. Or, well, I'll let you. Could I address that question to Councilmember Lim or Councilmember Anderson, Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, the change that we had from the Gibson drilling mud, which caused the odor, was to the NeoFlow drilling mud, and the NeoFlow drilling mud was a synthetic-based drilling mud. So that is reflected in this amendment. That what we ended up having the operator use, which was mitigating the odor, was a synthetic-based drilling mud. And then the wording also allows for the fact that there could be used by the operators other types of drilling muds that minimize and mitigate odors. So there's some flexibility in there for future advancement in there.
Okay. And so, and that leads me to my next question, where it says the other types of muds that minimize and mitigate odors. Do we think that we should categorize that as approved by the city?
The overall thrust of the section, this is in section 1754-90. The overall thrust of that section is to give deference to the staff in its approval. I don't know if the legal team wants to address that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, Elizabeth, if you want to jump in and talk about the general approvals, or Tammy, for this whole section, that the regulatory power that the city and county has with regards to these plans.
Or I'm happy to, Nancy. So maybe I'll just point out in this slide here, which does contain the language from section 090 DD odor. It actually says operators required to take odor mitigation measures to address odors and chemical smells, including the following, and there's a list, which includes certain types of drilling muds as required by the city based on the nature, size, and location of the facility. So it is up to the city to decide which of the suite of odor mitigation measures that are listed, and a synthetic drilling mud is one of them, but not the only one, an operator would need to use based on, again, the nature, size, and the location of the facility. So perhaps all odor mitigation measures listed will be required by staff or by city council, ultimately as the ultimate arbiter of all of the permit applications. But it may be that in some instances, only some of the odor mitigation measures are necessary. And that framework basically is the framework that applies throughout these regulations. So there's a list of plans that the operator has to provide, including an odor mitigation plan and an air quality plan and a noise monitoring plan,
sure,
water quality plan, right? And so for all of those plans, the operator has to comply with the contents of the plan that are specified in the regulations. And then the city staff initially, as the first cut, will review the plan information and contents and determine whether or not the plans actually conform to the regulations. assuming that the operator gets past that point, then in their full application, they also have to demonstrate compliance with all of the actual rules and regulations, including how they will prevent and mitigate and minimize adverse impacts, whether it's nuisance impacts or impacts to air quality or water quality or safety. So ultimately, whether or not an operator actually obtains a permit is the decision that's first up to staff as the one who would recommend whether or not the applicant's requirements meet the regulations. And then ultimately it's up to City Council to determine whether or not the application meets the purpose of the regulations and conforms to all of the requirements, and the operator can actually comply with all of the requirements. So basically each and every provision here is subject to a review and the ultimate determination by staff as well as City Council.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No more questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and thank you, Councilmember Lim and Anderson. I did not mean to butt in on Councilmember Anderson on seconding the first amendment, so I apologize. I didn't mean to butt in at all. I do remember doing a lot of research on this synthetic-based oil, and I think, when I was researching, we had those issues, and I distinctly remember a person making sure that people were notified and the right people were notified. And when I did the research on the NeoFlow, it took me quite a few hours to really figure out what exactly it was. And we did have some concerns, however, about flash points, higher flammability. So we had those concerns too. So while we're mitigating odor, which I think it did solve our issues, and we did use NeoFlow, I do have concerns that perhaps NeoFlow or synthetic-based oil drilling muds might pose other issues. Did our staff do any research on, should we specifically name a type of synthetic-based oil so that way we aren't increasing, our vulnerability with flash points or explosions? So that's my only concern with that, and I just wanted to see what staff says about synthetic-based oils and if we looked into other ones.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Hinkle. We did talk about this issue and what to list out and potentially put a longer list and be very specific. I think what Elizabeth was just talking about, that the city is the ultimate arbiter of these applications and that it's as required as the city, that the way it's written right now gives us the ability to modify as technology goes further, and we don't want to have to force ourselves to make an amendment to this regulation to recognize new other types of muds that might work better in the future. So while I understand the want to give a specific list, we actually think that it's better to keep it a little more broad the way it's written so that staff and then council can utilize that information to make their determination of if this is the best mud at the time.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll do a little bit more research again on, the different categories. Sometimes they will shift, what belongs in what category. And so the industry could probably shift the naming of that. So I just think we have to be really cognizant too, as to how specific we are getting by using synthetic-based, oil drilling muds. Yeah, and there could be something else that could even be better than a synthetic-based oil drilling mud. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, that's my only concerns with that one. Thank you.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. If I recall correctly, categories, we're looking at the chart that linked back to some API designations, that categories 1, 2, and 3 were oil-based drilling muds, and category 4 was synthetic, and then category 5 was a different type of category. So it's really just a changing of that name. I think we should be clear on that one. That was that for, and I do remember, Councilmember Hinkle, the concern over the flash points of those drilling muds. Yes, there was a definite concern there, which I realized that we didn't capture here. So that is absolutely for consideration when an operator is choosing a drilling mud. But I do have and just really quickly here, I also want to take a moment to just let our staff know how much we appreciate all the time and the in-depth discussion. We kind of failed to do that earlier, so that our staff and our special counsel Elizabeth Pranos played a very important role in all of this, so that was appreciated. But I do want to make a clarification. This is a question for Ms. Rogers. On the amendment, the original text only says using category 4 or better drilling muds. So here it's so what we had here is changing it to synthetic based oil, but we also added or other types of muds that minimize and mitigate odors. Does Councilmember Lim need to redo that motion?
I'm sorry, if you can give me just a quick second, Councilmember Anderson. Here, can you mute for a second? Yes, no, I don't think the motion needs to be redone, but you are correct that actually the language on the, if all the council members could look on the screen, the language that starts with or other types, that should be in red as well. That is new language than what was published regulation. So the entire amendment is changing it to say using synthetic based oil, drilling muds, or other type of muds that minimize and mitigate odors. I don't think there's a need to redo the motion in the second because I think the intent was that subparagraph 5 should read as shown on the screen. But if council would like to remove and have the second reconfirmed, we can do that.
If Councilmember Lamb is okay, I'm willing to move forward. It's been clarified now for the record.
Yeah, I'm fine. It's been clarified and it was discussed in the context of this.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay, so any other discussion on this amendment? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Schaaf,
Yes.
Tessier,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Castriata,
Yes.
Groom,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Kuczynski,
Yes.
Law Evans,
Yes.
Lim.
Yes.
It passes unanimously. So I believe that's the only amendments, and so we'll move on to the original motion, which has been seconded. I will ask if there's any discussion on the 2144 as amended by the 3 amendments. Then I will go ahead and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Schaaf,
Yes.
Tessier,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Castriata,
Yes.
Groom,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Kuczynski,
Yes.
Law Evans,
Yes.
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt.
Yes.
It passes unanimously. I am going to pause for a second and thank everybody for their professionalism. It's safe to say that maybe half the people on the screen here started their professional politician careers because of oil and gas. It's been a long road. Many members of city council, and I'm not going to call it specific names, but many members of city council participated in the drafting of 181. As we all know, that 181 would not have, without 181, none of this could have occurred. And I guess I specifically want to thank Gene and Lori, council members Lim and Anderson for their efforts. This was a monumental task. Motions, there were a lot of motions along the way by the community, everybody else, but everybody worked together. The amendment process worked well. So I just wanted to personally thank each and every one of you, and the fact that it passed unanimously tonight speaks volumes about the staff, speaks volumes about city council, speaks volumes about the community. And so I guess because I'm the chair, I get the chance to take that liberty. Thank you, everybody. And I will go ahead and move on to to the next item. And it's not like we're done with oil and gas, because Thursday night is going to be dedicated to oil and gas to the current operations. And I will point out, people, that these regulations were being adopted tonight, and we'll have a second we'll have a second vote on them a few weeks from now. But they do not regulate the existing operations with extraction. That's the MOU. And so I want to make sure people understand that, which is why we continue to have discussions on the extraction operations. So let's go to council's consideration on first reading, proposed ordinance number 2147, adding a chapter to the Broomfield Municipal Code regarding residency of sexually violent predators. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which staff will summarize.
Thank you, Mayor. Christina Pena-Helm and Pat Gilbert, excuse me, have been working on this over the last few months. If you all remember, we had a circumstance mid 2020 that involved a situation that we did not spell out in the ordinance. And since then, Christina and Pat have been working diligently to talk to you all about this tonight. I do want to mention, so Chief Krieger is also on the line. We have not had any prior to this filing circumstances that would have driven us to move this to our ordinance, and thankfully we haven't had one since then. So with that, Christina and Pat, will you walk us through this item, please?
Christina Pena-Helm, Assistant City and County Attorney. It was requested that an ordinance be presented restricting where a sexually violent predator may reside within Broomfield. And throughout this presentation, sexually violent predator is abbreviated as SVP. An SVP is defined by Colorado statute, and it includes an offender who is 18 years of age or older, or who was tried as an adult, who was convicted of specified crimes of sexual assault or felony sexual contact, including sexual assault on a child, whose victim was a stranger to the offender or a person with whom the offender established a relationship, primarily for sexual victimization, and who, based on a risk assessment that's conducted, is found by a court to likely reoffend. Currently, there is one SVP living in Broomfield. There has been 2 SVPs registered in Broomfield since 2009, but one has since moved. Ordinance 2147 would restrict where an SVP can live within Broomfield. Next slide, please. Specifically, as drafted, the ordinance would restrict where an SVP can live. An SVP would be prohibited from living within 1,000 feet of a city recognized park, playground, or public or private school within Broomfield. A map was included with the memo and ordinance showing in purple on that map where the residential parcels are located outside of that 1,000-foot buffer zone. There are exceptions to the residency restriction, and those exceptions apply to a person who has already established a residence in Broomfield before the effective date of the ordinance, to a person under the age of 18 living with their parents, to a person placed in a foster care home, and if the park, playground, or public or private school was opened after the person established the residence. A person who violates this residency restriction would be subject to the general penalty of the Broomfield Municipal Code, which is a fine not exceeding $2,650 or imprisonment not exceeding 1 year or both. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. We'll go to public comments next. If anybody in the public wants to speak, I don't know if there's one of the queue, you need to press *3. I'm not noting any comments on that, so I will go to city council comments next. Members should limit themselves to questions during this portion. The time to introduce amendments to state positions for or against this item is later. Are there any questions? Next is council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2147. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2147 by title?
Ordinance number 2147, adding chapter 9-56 to Title 9, Section 5 of the Broomfield Municipal Code, restricting the residency of a sexually violent predator as defined by CRS 18-3-414-5.
Is there a motion? Councilmember Tessier.
Move that ordinance number 2147 be adopted on first reading and ordered published in full.
Go ahead, read the rest if you could.
Oh, sorry. That's all I have on my, that's all I have. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. That a public hearing on the ordinance be held virtually at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, June 8th, 2021, as allowed by City Council procedures and rules of order. And that the second and final reading of the ordinance be scheduled for June 8th, 2021, following the public hearing.
Councilmember Grom.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for listening to the proposed amendments yesterday. I just wanted to speak a little bit tonight as we head into the second reading, and I just wanted to open up the conversation should anyone want to talk about it tonight in the public meeting. So thanks for hearing this out tonight as I brought forth some amendment ideas yesterday. As many of you know, Ward 5 has the only sexually violent predator residing in Broomfield and was released during a time where we had no laws on where they could live. This caused a lot of uproar in my ward, and I just wanted to be sure we glean from other cities and counties on where their laws were and what is reasonably protective. So I will be proposing amendments prior to our second reading. And those amendments, I'll propose ideas for additional setbacks to retail shopping malls, rec centers, outdoor pools, libraries, daycare centers, and after-school program facilities. I originally did want 2,000-foot setbacks, but then I realized looking at our maps that the only place a person could live is in Ward 5, again, generally in Wilcox, or where there's not housing for all. So I backed down from 2,000 feet. Upon reading the diligent research that our amazing staff put into noting what other cities and counties do, I noticed that there are more protective ways to ensure a higher level of safety, particularly where children are often unsupervised. And I will preface this with that anything can happen anywhere. The attempted kidnapping of my own daughter in the parking lot at the Larkridge shopping mall in broad daylight with a full parking lot where the perpetrator opened our rear car door and tried to grab my daughter out of my car is still traumatizing. This was an incident that gave me the space and understanding that we can only do so much to prevent more harmful acts towards our children. But if I hadn't been by her side, he would have easily just taken her. I'm sure of it. So when I approached this ordinance, I just looked at places where our kids and youth are often unsupervised, like large shopping malls, like our Flatirons mall. In addition to safety, I also worry about economic repercussions when it will or could be announced that a sexually violent predator could be living near or on top of a large mall, public outdoor pools and rec centers, keeping in mind that we're not at build out yet. I also looked at what was congruent with schools, like adding daycare facilities and after-school programs, who are often extensions of our school programs. And while bus stops are also at the forefront of my mind, as well as designated walk-to-school paths, I realize more mapping will need to be involved. I did feel that recreational trails, churches, and ball fields, like the other cities and counties have incorporated, would be taking it too far in Broomfield, as we have a lot of trails in Broomfield, and places like churches and ball fields generally have parental supervision. So ultimately, we can find a way to create setbacks for sexually violent predators away from spaces where children and teens congregate. To exemplify to our residents, we do care about the places kids are unsupervised or vulnerable, and it is my hope that we can create a safer Broomfield, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow council members on what that looks like in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Councilmember Lim.
Yes, I had already discussed this with Councilmember Hinkle, but I didn't present it to staff. I mean, I asked Councilmember Hinkle if residential mall needs a definition, if she's going to include that in the further setback facilities for setback that setbacks apply to for residents. So that was a question that I had raised. And I guess my other question for staff is will staff have prepared a map which reflects in anticipation of Councilmember Hinkle's amendment that we can see ahead of time? I think that that would be helpful for me anyway. I did read in the memo, the court case, which referred to the fact that I forget which city it was in Colorado, that, even though it had thrown out 99% of the area in the city, that, the court said it was okay. But I would feel better having seen a map that shows what this amendment throws out as not possible to reside in.
Yes, we started the conversation regarding creating a map with these additional locations. It is time consuming for GIS to create this map, and we will have to work with them, as you said, about definitions regarding specific areas such as malls, because obviously there's Flatirons, but if the definition is more expansive than that, then a lot more areas can be included. So we have started that conversation. It just will take some time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Tessier,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Castriata,
Yes.
Broom,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Jaworski,
Yes.
Law Evans,
Yes.
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Schaaf.
Yes.
It passes unanimously. So let's move on to, first of all, item 11E was reviewed earlier this evening with item 10A, concluding the council business portion of tonight's agenda. The city and county's attorney's report is next. Ms. Rogers, do you have a report?
I don't have a report, but I just want to add on my thanks to Councilmember Lim and Councilmember Anderson, the other council members who provided comments and did a lot of work on the oil and gas regulations, and definitely to staff and Elizabeth Paranos. I came here 4 months ago and got in at the last minute, and I have to tell you that this team has been working really hard, council and staff, on the regulations. So I share people's excitement and thanks on getting that through first reading. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Nancy. The city and county manager's report is next. City Manager Hoffman, do you have a report?
No, sir, I do not.
There is not a legislative update this evening, and there is no business before the Broomfield Urban Renewal Authority and the Arista Local Improvement District Board of Directors. Staff provided the first quarter expense report for elected officials under special reports. There are no requests for future action this evening, which concludes the items on this evening's agenda at 9:04. Is there any other business to come before council? And I'll go ahead and say, to everybody that we will be having a special session on Thursday, starting at 6 p.m., which will be, we'll also be tackling, I didn't mention earlier, reverse setbacks from oil and gas activities, which and the community is invited to provide comments. With that said, there being no further business, the council meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.